Hello everyone, and welcome to Soft Stories, and welcome to the finale of Silas Hocking's Real Grit. Today on Soft Stories we will see the culmination of the events that have been in the making for so long. More than half of the episodes of Soft Stories that I've recorded have been with the reading of this book, and so it is with great joy, but also with a touch of sadness, that we come to the end. Whatever the feelings, though, I am happy to have shared this experience with you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the series, this book came to me at a time when I felt I really needed it, when it seemed to have something that it could teach me about patience and understanding and building oneself as a person, an adult, and showing real grit. And for that I will always be grateful to it. Even if, on reading it back with you all, I noticed more of the flaws in the writing style or some of the underlying assumptions that the author makes in his worldview, which I no longer ascribe to or have never done. But at any rate, the story is still fun, and I hope that all of you are looking forward to seeing the results of everything that has transpired as much as I am. And so without further ado, let us begin with chapter 34, A Candid Answer. Ralph Formby had no idea of the surprise that was in store for him at Trevenna House, or he would have paused ere he rang the doorbell. Ada, seeing him coming from an upstairs window, came down into the hall to greet him, and at once ushered him into the dining room, where Jack, looking white and exhausted, reclined on a large sofa, and Madge Tregony and Dr. Pendray sat near, engaged in animated conversation. Ralph was delighted at seeing Ada so bright and animated. She was dressed all in white, for the weather, as we have stated, was warm and sultry, and he thought he had never seen her look more sweet and beautiful than she did that afternoon. Her greeting was very warm and friendly, for she had no suspicion of the truth, and just now she was so happy in the realization of her long-cherished hope that had Ralph been a beggar she would have welcomed him with a smile and sent him away rejoicing. He seemed a little bit surprised when she led the way past the cosy old drawing-room and threw open the dining-room door. "I have an old friend here," she said, looking up at him with one of her sweetest smiles. He scarcely heeded her words, so intoxicated was he with her smile, for if there was anyone in the world he loved equal to himself, it was Ada. Indeed, he believed that for the first time in his life he was really and truly in love, and sometimes tried to persuade himself, though not with much success, that it was Ada alone he cared for, and not her money. Dr. Pendray rose at once when the door was thrown open, and waited for the visitor, whoever he or she might be, to enter. Ralph entered with a firm and stately step, grasped Dr. Pendray's hand warmingly, not noticing the figure on the sofa. He then turned to Madge and advanced a step to greet her, holding out his hand at the same time. The next moment, his eye fell upon Jack, who from his quiet corner was watching the scene, with a curious twinkle in his eye. Instantly Ralph stopped short in the middle of the room, while a look of horror swept across his face. For a few moments he stared at Jack as though his eyes would start out of their sockets, then staggered backwards and to all appearance would have fallen had not Dr. Pendray grabbed him by the arm, while his face and even lips became perfectly livid. This is, he gasped. An unexpected meeting, said Jack quietly. It is, he said, staring excitedly around the room. Then, seeing the door standing wide open, he made a rush for it, and seizing hat and stick which were in the hall, he strode out of the house, and before either Ada or her visitors could recover from their astonishment, he had completely vanished. That was the last ever seen of Ralph Formby in Cornwall. He did not wait to go to Cliff Farm for his portmanteau, but rushed straight away to the railway station, and caught the earliest train to London. After he had left Trevenna House, Ada's visitors stared at one another, and then at her, but no one seemed prepared to volunteer any remark. Madge looked curiously at Jack, as though she would read his secret, but he was not to be drawn. At length Dr. Pendray ventured the remark, "Your cousin seemed hardly pleased at meeting you, Mr. Formby." My presence evidently came upon him as a surprise, Jack said. I thought he would be pleased to find you were still living, Ada said, but Jack did not reply. Had you met before? Madge asked abruptly. Jack blushed and looked uneasy, then answered, Suppose we change the subject. It's scarcely fair to discuss an acquaintance behind his back. At this Madge laughed outright, but threw a glance at Jack at the same time, as much to say, You cannot put me off that way. I have my suspicions, and I will find out yet. While Jack remained at Trevenna House, Madge kept Ada company, but she was careful to disturb the lovers' tete-a-tetes as little as possible. Ada was not long in discovering that Jack loved her still, and he scarcely need to be told that her heart was all his own. He found her more beautiful, more womanly than when he went away, and all his old passion surged back like a flood at the first sight of her face. How strange, he said a few days later, that you should have found me in the way you did. Not more strange, she answered, than that you should have found me in Boggart Clough. Oh, yes, I think so, he replied, for I went there on purpose to find you. And I found you without seeking, she said with a laugh. And were you glad to see me, Ada? And he took her hand in his. I cannot tell you how glad, she replied. I came back, he said, with fear and trembling. I have been trying during all those years to redeem, in some measure, the past. And you have done it nobly. Scarcely that. But I have learned to labour and wait. Will you tell me all the story of your struggle and triumph? She asked. Some day, if you care to listen, but the story is a very long one. And did you never lose hope? Not every hope. I lost the great hope with which you inspired me. When I was in Liverpool, for instance, I never expected a meeting like this. And what inspired you? The memory of the past, and the love of right. And you forgot me? Forgot you, Ada? No, never. Your presence was always with me by night and day, and the memory of your words to do my duty for duty's sake was a constant stimulus. And if you had not succeeded, you would not have come back again. Oh no. You would scarcely have cared to have admitted a navvy into your drawing room. I would have admitted you if you were in rags. He smiled at her, sweetly, then answered, I often wondered what sort of reception I should get. And are you satisfied with it? She asked. Oh yes, quite. And now, may I ask a question of you? Yes, 20 if you like. And will you give me a candid answer? Yes, I will promise you that. Then, are you satisfied with me? Quite. And may I venture to... Yes, you may, my darling. And for a while, no other words were spoken, but the moments that followed were the most blissful of their lives. I have promised to be Jack's wife, Ada said to Madge as they sat together that evening, after Jack had retired. Did you only promise today? Asked Madge in surprise. No, I could not promise till he asked me. Well, I thought he would ask on the first day of his arrival, said Madge laughingly. But you know he is cautious, like Dr. Pendray, and he wanted to be sure before he asked again. Well, I'm glad you've promised anyway, said Madge, for I think he's just splendid. Equal to the doctor? I will not say that, said Madge with a blush. Still, I'm sure he's very true and noble. What a mercy he came back in time. My life has been full of mercies, Ada answered reverently, and I am so happy just now that I feel quite undeserving of such joy. Dr. Pendray was very attentive to Jack, coming 2 and even 3 times a day, but our hero was not long in discovering the secret of this. I owe it to your friend, Miss Tregony, that the doctor looks after me so well, I think, said Jack to Ada, as they sat together one morning in the breakfast-room. Oh yes, there's no doubt of that, she answered smilingly. I believe, in his case, that it was love at first sight. Has he been here long? Jack asked. About a year. He came fresh from college to succeed Dr. Polwheel, who died last year. He's a fine young fellow, at any rate, Jack answered. I should get quite jealous of him, did I know not that he was in love with Miss Tregony. No, you wouldn't, Ada answered. laying her little white hand across his mouth. "You would never get jealous of anyone." "And why not?" "Because... well, because what?" "Oh, I don't think I'll tell you." "Oh, yes, you must tell me, or I shall get jealous in reality." "Then, because you have such a good opinion of yourself." "Oh, no, I'm not going to have that. You're just evading the question." "Am I?" "Yes. Now, what's the true answer?" "Because Jack has such a good opinion of me." "You're right there, darling," he answered with a happy smile. "And because he knows that I love him so truly, and can never love anyone else." "Does he know that?" "If he doesn't, he must be very dull." Which he always was." "Which point I will not argue," she said, laughing. "But I often think how dull I was when I first knew you." "Why, my darling?" "For so misjudging you," she answered. "Did you misjudge me?" "Indeed I did. I thought you were incorrigibly idle and hopelessly apathetic." "And you don't think that now?" "No. I think my Jack is one of the bravest men that ever breathed. Only a true hero could have done what he has done during the last 4 or 5 years." "Hush, my darling," he answered. "If I don't get jealous, you will make me vain." "I'm not afraid of that either," she answered. "Honest praise is not flattery." But we need not pursue the conversation further. Jack felt that it was worth being thrown over the cliff to have such a loving nurse to wait upon him day by day. Indeed, he declared that it was so nice to be petted and waited upon that he should not be in the least hurry to get well, while Madge gave it as her opinion that he had not got hurt at all, but was playing the old soldier from the first. So the days sped on, like a happy dream. Jack preserved an unbroken silence respecting Ralph, and Ada was so unsuspicious that she never thought of connecting the latter with Jack's accident. Madge, however, was not to be hoodwinked, and communicated her suspicions to the doctor, though both preserved a discreet silence upon the subject. But though Jack said nothing, he thought a great deal. It was clear to him now that all Ralph's professed friendship in the years gone by was but a blind, a piece of bare-faced hypocrisy. The mystery of the forged receipt was now quite clear. Ralph had secured him the situation at Brown and Toadsby's with a deliberate purpose. Evidently from the first it was his object to get him out of the way. He regarded him as his rival, and if he could succeed in blasting his character, he would gain his purpose. The diabolical villainy of the whole proceeding was of a piece with this latest act. Yet he was not sorry that he had allowed him to escape. There was no feeling of revenge in his heart. Ralph had sought to compass his ruin, yet so far everything had worked together for his good. "He has harmed himself more than he has harmed me," he said to himself. "And more than that, the old good book has taught me not to overcome of evil, but to overcome evil with good." The excitement of the time, the shock of his nerves, the joy of finding Ada, the bliss of requited love, altogether with the pleasure and the pain of being an invalid and of being so tenderly nursed, drove all thought of his uncle out of Jack's mind. But one afternoon, while sitting alone in the drawing-room, the brief conversation he had with Ralph on the cliff shot across his mind like a flash of light. "No," he said to himself, "it was not a dream. He distinctly told me that my Uncle John had returned from Australia, and finding that I had neither seen him nor Ada, and that none of my old friends knew I was alive, I suppose he thought he might kill me without exciting any suspicion. Well, he's failed. Thank heaven for that." That very same day, he wrote to his uncle, and the next day he got a telegram to the following effect: "I'm starting for Cornwall right away." Chapter 35. Be happy while you can. Had our hero been John Formby's son, the latter could not have hailed the tidings of his safety with greater manifestations of delight. Scarcely giving himself time to crush a change of raiment into his portmanteau, he hurried away to catch the earliest train to the south. Like everyone else, he had nearly given up all hopes of ever finding Jack alive. Yet the bitterness of his disappointment no one knew. He had come to England mainly for Jack's sake. He had determined to make his nephew his heir, and when he discovered that Jack was missing, he resolved to leave no stone unturned in his efforts to find him. He was not the man to quail before difficulties or to lose hope while the remotest possibility of success remained. From what he could gather of Jack's character, he scouted the idea that the lad would commit suicide. "The young rascal's evidently some grit in him, and is fighting his way somewhere," was his reflection. "And so I'll wait, and keep my weather eye open at the same time." He had never been able to fathom Ralph, to use his own expression. He had watched him narrowly from time to time, and had made inquiries respecting his character amongst those who knew him best, but the result was by no means satisfactory. "I hardly know whether the fellow is a saint or a villain," he said to himself. "Anyway, I don't freeze to him, as the Yankees say, and I shall have to know him better before I trust him." What surprised him most was that Ralph did not appear to concern himself about the matter. If the fellow cared about my money, he reflected, he would surely try to worm his way into my favour. But instead of that, he treats me with a cool indifference. There surely must be something at the bottom of all this. But whatever might be at the bottom, he was unable to discover it, and so he waited and hoped with growing impatience and with daily increasing fear. Hence, Jack's letter to him was like a voice from the dead. "The young rascal's come out on top at last," he exclaimed. "Hurrah! He is off." Jack was lying alone on the sofa, wondering what his uncle was like, when the doorbell rang violently, and a moment later the old gentleman was ushered into the room. "God bless my soul!" he shouted, nearly shaking Jack's hand off at the same time. "Thou'rt the very image of thy father." "Am I?" said Jack with a smile. "Thou art, lad, thou art a real Formby, and I'm as glad as if somebody had left me a fortune that I found thee." "And I'm glad I've found you," said Jack, "for I'm sure we shall be friends." "Friends? Oh, I should think we shall be. Why, boy, I've been searching all over England for thee." "I wish I'd known," said Jack. "Well, perhaps it's best as it is, for thou hast to fight thy own battle without aid from anyone." "That is true, uncle." "So much the better. But thou'll be able to settle down as a gentleman now, for I have brass enough for both." "I was not cut out for a gentleman," said Jack. "Besides that, I've just signed a contract, and that will last me 1.5 years at least. A contract, eh? Well, I'm glad of that too. I don't like idlers and drones. Upon my soul, I don't. But let's hear all about it. So Jack took his uncle into his confidence and gave him an outline of what he had done since his father's death. "Oh, boy," said the old man, with tears in his eyes, "thou'rt real grit upon my soul, thou art. But suppose we go into partnership. I know all about this kind of work, and I can find the brass as well. What dost say, lad? I want something to do. Formby and Formby, contractors. That'll sound very well." "I shall be delighted," Jack answered, and so the matter was settled during the first hour of their acquaintance. Ada had seen John Formby before, and so they met, not as strangers, but as old friends. She wanted him to stay as her guest at Ravenna House, but he would not hear of it, and so it ended in his taking the rooms lately occupied by Ralph at Cliff Farm, where he was joined by Jack as soon as the doctor's permission could be obtained. Jack's sprained ankle caused him a great deal of trouble, and he had to use a crutch for nearly 3 months. But he never complained. He felt that his mercies far outweighed his misfortunes, and a quiet hour with Ada made him forget all his pain. The summer died away into autumn as gently as the morning star melts into the light of heaven. The evenings were delicious, and the sunsets glorious, and while Jack and Ada, together with the doctor and Madge, would be quietly rambling over the downs, or skimming gently over the placid waters of the bay, Uncle John and the vicar might be seen smoking their pipes together in the garden, the former entertaining his host with stories of adventure in the Australian bush. Nothing was heard of Ralph or his doings till nearly Christmas. He had kept quiet many weeks, much wondering what action Jack would take, but finding that he took no effort to punish him, nor, as far as he could learn, even hinted at the struggle on the cliff, he began to breathe freely again, and set to work with diligence to replenish his sadly drained coffers. In the meanwhile, however, matters between him and Toadsby had been coming to a head. A few hints from the latter led to an inquiry into the workings of the National Federation and other kindred schemes. At the first hint of what was coming, Ralph tried to escape out of the country, but was arrested at Southampton and brought to Bodelford for trial. The revelations at that trial were very painful for all concerned. Generous people saw how they had been duped in the name of religion and philanthropy, and vowed that they would never subscribe again to any charitable institution. And so the innocent suffered because of the guilty, and deserving objects were allowed to languish because this man had so successfully played the rogue. During the severe cross-examination to which he was subjected, Ralph admitted that he forged the receipt that lost Jack his situation, but declared that Toadsby had supplied him with the form and pocketed the money. The general conclusion was that both Toadsby and Ralph were rogues, and that Jack's name and character had been cleared from every stain. Indeed, so deeply was this felt, that some time after, Jack was entertained at a banquet by the leading citizens of Bodelford, and toasted in the most eulogistic and complimentary terms possible, while the leading newspaper devoted 2 columns to a sketch of his life since the day his father was found dead in his office, and held him up as a triumph of honesty and perseverance, and as a pattern for all young men. Ralph was sentenced to 18 months' imprisonment with hard labour, and that was the last heard from him for many years. Early in the spring, Jack and Ada were married, and after a happy month in Italy they returned to Trevenna House, where Uncle John promised to reside with them, in which a room had been set apart for his exclusive use. Jack had found his heart's idol and his heart's content, and Ada, happy in the love and protection of a noble husband, gave herself again to generous deeds, and became more truly than ever the Lady Bountiful of the place. A few weeks after Ada's marriage, old Squire Netherby died, and Dick and his wife returned to Netherby Hall. This was just the opportunity that Uncle John had been waiting for, and after a good deal of persuasion, Dick was induced to sell Rycroft and allow it to return again to the possession of the Formbys. And so, the first summer after his marriage, Jack found himself again in the home of his childhood, and amid those pleasant surroundings that would ever remain dear to his heart. "Ada, my darling, it seems like old times to be out on the hills and moors again," Jack said to her, one breezy day, as they skirted the heathery moors arm in arm. "Oh, Jack," she said with swimming eyes, "this is beyond my happiest dream." "This is the place," he said after a pause, "where I stole my first kiss. Do you remember it, my darling?" "As if I could ever forget," she answered with a smile. "Then I will kiss you here again," he said, suiting the action to the word. "You are my lover, then," she said with a happy smile. "You're my husband now." And for answer he gave her another kiss, and they walked on in silence. Many years had passed since that day. Jack is Sir John Formby now, and young Tom Lashton has succeeded his father to the baronetcy, which that gentleman received shortly before his death. Two closer friends do not exist than Jack and Tom, nor two more successful businessmen. Uncle John is still living, and able to render valuable assistance to our hero in his work, while Jack's children idolize the old gentleman, and are never tired of hearing stories of Australian life and adventure. Ralph is in New Zealand, and by all accounts is trying to live an honest life. Jack found him one day, in the snow, ragged, shoeless, and almost famished, and brought him into the house and fed and clothed him. He seemed greatly touched by Jack's kindness, and looking across to Ada, he said, brokenly, "You have a noble husband." "A nobler does not breathe," she answered warmly. "I tried to kill him," he said abruptly. "To kill him?" she said in astonishment. "Yes, I pushed him over the cliff." "Did he never tell you?" "No," she exclaimed, looking eagerly from Ralph to her husband. "We will let bygones be bygones, Ralph," Jack answered. "God has made all things work together for my good, and you were not yourself that day." "God knows I was not," he said brokenly, "and it's been a heavy burden on my conscience ever since." "We will say no more about the past," Jack said. "Let us think of the future. What do you propose to do?" "I hardly know," was the answer. "I think sometimes if I could get out of England I might have a chance." "Well, I will make you an offer," Jack said. I will give you £200 if you start at once. Ralph could only stare dumbly at the speaker. He was too astonished to reply. Needless to say, however, that Jack's offer was accepted, and the next day saw him in Liverpool on board a sailing vessel bound for Melbourne. He has written to Jack about twice a year ever since, and according to his own account, he's doing well. Kate Netherby is still unmarried, and to all appearance is likely to remain so. The firm of Brown and Toadsby has long since ceased to exist. Brown has gone over to the great majority. Toadsby, in common parlance, has gone to the dogs. The vicar of Trevenna is still living, but Madge no longer keeps his house. She has been Mrs. Pendray these many years, and when Jack and Ada are at Trevenna, their children play together on the beach and dig holes in the sand. There is really no necessity that Jack should work any more, for he has amassed a larger fortune than either he or his children will ever spend. But he says he can't help doing a little. Work has become second nature with him, and if he had nothing to do, he would sink into the blues and die. Ada says he is not hurt with what he does, and as she knows he is always happier when he is doing something, her advice to him is, be happy, Jack, as long as you can. The end. And so we conclude our reading of Real Grit by Silas Hocking. I have very much enjoyed revisiting this book, and I hope for those of you to whom it is new, which I suspect is the vast majority of you, I hope that you have enjoyed it as well. If any of you were familiar with the works of Silas Hocking, I would love to know about it. How did you come to find out about him? As I say, my encounter with Mr. Hocking came purely by chance in a pub in England one night when I happened to pull it off the shelf, and the barkeep was kind enough to give it to me. It's very much the kind of action that I would expect from one of the characters in a book like this, and I find it very inspiring. I wish you all the best until next time, when we will start a whole new adventure together. Be well, and goodbye.